Hello pandas and welcome back to the shop. How much do you make scrapping lighting ballasts for copper wire? Well, that's what I want to know, and I've been looking forward to doing this one for a while because these things are kind of heavy and take up a bunch of space, and I've heard they're pretty good. In fact, I didn't just hear they're pretty good, I know they're pretty good because I watched Project Shop Florida's video on it. That's right, this video idea is stolen. I'm stealing video ideas from the Copper King himself, the best scrapper on YouTube. But while he had a mountain of them and a bunch of fancy tools, I wanted to find out how much the average scrapper, without those fancy tools, how much you and I can make scrapping lighting ballasts for copper wire. Is it worth it? Well, I hope so. Now, I've already weighed them all. They're actually heavier than you might think. Because there's a whole bunch of junk inside and I don't want to be responsible for saving and sweeping up all that stuff just to get good data. So we've got that in advance, and we've made sure these are all the PCB-free ones. That's supposed to be horrible, cause cancer, and that's why they're difficult to get rid of. And I don't really want to be cracking those open and breathing all that in. So let's get right into it and see how long it takes. Now, besides a sturdy table, I've only really got two tools. A pair of gloves that I don't mind getting really messed up, and this hammer with the wedge head. This was actually also a suggestion from Project Shop Florida. I saw him using one and decided I had to have one. I think it's understandable. My technique was lacking at the start, but I got there eventually. They do leave a mess, though. This was just a taste of what was to come. Now, getting the steel out of the inside of these things did feel a little fiddly at first, but like I said, I did eventually get it figured out. When you've got 100 pounds of the things, you get a little practice. I'll just show you here on the last one my technique, if you will, in real time. It did not take long at all. And the wedge-shaped hammer is definitely the correct choice for splitting the steel off of the sides. That little bottom one there is pretty easy to take off. And then what I found to be the best was actually just setting the end of the hammer on the upper edge, and rather than deforming anything. You can just tap the whole assembly down and it moves everything, because they're not actually fixed on that tightly. It did get pretty quick, eventually. Now, I only had one of these. This is a newer, smaller style, but I wanted to check it out just to see how different it was inside. And, yeah, they've changed a lot. There was 5 or 6 of these tiny little transformer things. Still copper, but if you can tell the difference, I wouldn't take these apart. Now, I spent a little extra time just bashing them and ripping the outer layer of paper off because I wanted them to look good, so I didn't have any arguments. And I was left with a bucket of these nice little bundles of copper. And a pretty big bin full of trash. Ah, and there we go. We did it. That took a little over an hour to actually crack all of these things open, and then a little bit of time to peel the outer layer off of these things. So I'm going to call it an hour and a half to go from 130 pounds of lighting ballasts to 80 pounds of steel and about 20 pounds of number 2 copper. At least I'm hoping it's number 2 copper. We'll see when we bring it in. And I gotta say, this hammer, this is the scrap hammer, no doubt. I should have gotten one of these a long time ago, but I think it's going to be a recurring character from here on out for sure. Makes a world of difference. Now, it definitely helped that these were really old and dried out inside and really cold. So I think this was a particularly fast yield. That smaller, newer one that we cracked open right at the end, I would definitely just avoid those completely. But before we draw any conclusions, I want to find out just what this was worth. And it's off to sell it at the yard. At least, that's what I thought. Well, that was awkward. I went to both my favorite scrapyards, and neither of them were able to give me number 2 copper for the lumps of windings the way they were. They were both doing their best to be generous categorizing them, sort of. One of them offered me 60 cents a pound, and the other offered me 90 cents a pound. Unfortunately, I feel like that would be doing a disservice to all of us. So I had no choice but to bring them home and process them for a little longer and clean all of that paper and junk out, which made a huge mess, and it took a long time. But it definitely gave us all the data for some good science. So here are those results. Now the baseline we're going to be comparing it to, I don't get a great price for light ballast. I get 10 cents a pound. So at 130 pounds, that would be $13. That's what this is all going to jump off of. All the paper and junk that I got off of the windings weighs nearly nothing, but it did bring the weight down from 20 pounds to 19 pounds. So in total, I got $7.13 for the steel and $76 for the number 2 bare copper wire. And the result of all that effort was increasing the payout by a total of $70.15. Now, this is always true with scrapping, but I've never seen it more obvious than with this particular experiment. This is going to be extremely subjective depending on what your scrapyard is able to give you. If I was able to find a scrapyard that was willing to buy the windings the way they were at number 2 copper, then that hour and a half would have been worth $46.75 an hour. And that is pretty good. So for that reason alone, I think it's worth trying out if you're at all curious, because it could be really worthwhile. Unfortunately, I had to spend an extra 2.5 hours pulling all the windings out and cleaning them up, and maybe I could have been a little lazier about it, but at that rate, it was $17.50 an hour, which realistically is over the threshold and a little better than other scrap sorting and cleaning experiments that I've done. So with that as the low end, it's still probably worth trying. Worth pointing out, though, that I had almost every other favorable variable going for me. The ballasts that I had chosen were old and really dry and really cold, so the tar just broke off in big chunks, and it was super easy to get all of the material out of those casings. With that in mind, though, an hour and a half is flying through those at a spectacular pace, so your results may vary. Now, some other possible outcomes to consider. I could have just shelled the ballasts, removing the outer casing and the tar, and sold them as transformers. Doing that, you'd be getting paid for the steel weight as well. My one yard would pay as high as 20 cents a pound for transformers, and the other could be as high as 40 cents. So with those numbers, 20 cents a pound, you'd be getting $17 instead of the $13. That would be a waste of time. At 40 cents a pound, you'd be getting $34. So if it only took you a half an hour, which it should because that would be the easiest part, you'd be making $42 an hour. Oh, and if I'd accepted the highest offer I got without bringing them back home to reprocess them at 90 cents, that plus the steel would have been $14 an hour. A complete loss in terms of time. Something to consider. In any case, this process is extremely subjective. On the one hand, it's nice that you don't need any fancy tools. I got by with just a hammer and some gloves. But on the other hand, it is a huge mess. You definitely want to be using a filter mask and eye protection because that stuff gets everywhere. And it's like a pure tar dust that's just flying all over the place. My gloves, my clothes, my tools, my space is all covered in this dark, sticky dust. It's not pleasant. But if you're in a similar situation as myself and the price you get for unprocessed ballast kind of sucks, then it can be worth up to $46.75 an hour to take the time to crack them open and clean them up yourself. If you do, though, I would suggest taking the hammer and beating the heck out of the lumps of copper windings to turn them into just a complete mash of obviously dirty windings in hopes of getting the best price without having to unwind them all individually. In any case, that's what I've found. Processing light ballast for scrap copper wire, assuming you've saved up the good ones, worth it. Messy, but potentially worth it. I hope this has been helpful. I had fun exploring this. Will I do this again? I'm not sure. But it's nice to know. And it's nice to have you here. So If this brought value, like and subscribe for more high quality scrap content, and I'll see you on the next one. Leave it better than you found it. Keep doing the thing.